I've been interrupted like 10 times by my brother trying to film this friggin' video, so hopefully nothing happens and I can actually film it this time. Anyways, I'm literally going to go insane. Hey guys! I was on CreepyPasta and decided I was going to read some creepy stories if I could find any good ones. I just got on the app. I found one called The Whistler and I was gonna wait until it's nighttime, but I don't feel like getting scared right now, so daytime it is. And I haven't read it yet. I don't know how scary it is, but let's get right into it. The front door opened, slammed shut. Any moment now, Gary would either start buzzing about how well work had gone, or else he would stalk upstairs and think how best to word his complaints about his boss while he changed for supper. It was always one or the other. There seemed to be no middle ground with Gary's job. Today was a complaining day, and a bad one by the way. Gary's feet stomped up the stairs and down the hall to the bedroom. I sighed and mentally prepared myself as I extinguished the flame beneath the stew. I had learned long ago that it was best to let Gary vent his frustrations without interruption. If he was allowed to say his piece, he would calm down quickly, and then we could carry on with our evening. I glanced up at the ceiling suddenly, surprised. Is that whistling? It was not angry, spiteful, I don't know that word. Melancholy. I probably messed that up. Also, if you hear noise in the background, my cat is in the room with me, and she's loud. So if she could calm down right now, that would be great. But she doesn't listen to me, so let's continue with the story. Nothing like that, just cheerful, intermittent whistling. I had been wrong then. Gary was not frustrated. Quite the opposite, it seemed. Inside, I was relieved. I knew it never had anything to do with me, but listening to Gary complaining did begin to grate on my nerves until it felt like I was the reason for all his trouble. Maybe he has some really good news, I thought to myself as I began setting the table. It certainly had to be something above and beyond a pleasant workday that put Gary in such a good mood. The phone rang as I poured the milk, startling me and sending opalescent puddles spreading across the table. Quickly throwing some napkins down to halt the expanding spill, I wiped off my hands and answered. Hello? Hi honey, it's me. I'm going to be pretty late tonight. Traffic's horrible. I think there was an accident or something. I'm not sure how long it'll take to clear up, so you should probably just start eating without me. See you soon, I hope. And without giving me a chance to reply, Gary hung up. A deathly chill encased me as I turned to face the front door. I could see it was still locked. Upstairs, the whistling continued. The tune was familiar. It was so off-key that I had trouble naming it. It went on and on, halting now and then for a breath, rising and falling until I could stand it no longer. I found myself inching toward the knife rack on the counter, and before I knew it, I had pulled the largest blade from its place. Whoa, I thought to myself, slow down. There was an intruder in my house. My best option was to call the police. Sliding the knife back into place, I picked up the phone and began to dial 911. What answered was not the friendly, calming voice I expected. I slowly pulled the handset away from my ear and started at it with revulsion as a series of cheerful but off-key notes came pouring out, trilling in awful dissonance with the song from upstairs. My hand began to shake as I returned the phone to its place. My eyes turned once more to the ceiling. The sound had devolved into a senseless warbling, something that I found hard to connect with a human voice, although the melody was still vaguely familiar. My hand reached once more for the knife. I made my way timidly to the stairs, pausing as I came to the front door to make sure that it really was locked. An awful feeling of expectations trickled down the steps as I stared up into the darkness of the second-floor hallway, and I gripped the knife tighter, holding it in front of me to ward off what, I had no idea. Taking a deep breath, I began to climb. The upstairs corridor was empty, but I could not relax. The door to the master bedroom was shut, and I eyed it warily in the knowledge that it was always left open. Listening closely, beneath the whistling, I thought I could hear footsteps on the other side, padding softly as they shuffled across the carpet. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I placed one hand on the doorknob, took a moment to calm my pounding heart, and wrenched the door open. Immediately, the whistling stopped. The master bedroom was vacant, my ears ringing with the sudden silence. I crept inside, my knife held ready, but there was no sign of anyone besides myself. Releasing a pent-up sob of fear, I collapsed on the bed. Just a second ago, there had been someone in here. I had heard them whistling, walking back and forth. I would have sworn that I even saw a faint shadow pass underneath the door before I forced it open. Pulling myself together, I got up from the bed and made one last inspection of the room. Nothing. Had I imagined it all? Still shaking from fright, I resigned myself to the fact that the bedroom was empty and turned to leave. A tall figure blocked the door. A frightened shriek erupted from my throat as my arm instinctively fell, burying my knife in the intruder's chest. The figure grunted, it was a man, and stumbled out into the hall, colliding with the far wall before collapsing onto the floor. Gingerly fingering the bleeding hole in his shirt, the man looked weakly up at me. "Gary?" I stammered. His eyes slid halfway shut, his head rolled to one side, and his breath fell silent. The dripping knife opened from my hand as I covered my mouth in shock. My husband lay dead at my feet, and I, as the horror began to overwhelm me, a cold draft hit the back of my neck. Softly, so I could barely make it out, whistling. It passed by my ear and down the hall, heavy, stomping footsteps as the voice moved downstairs. The front door opened, and at that moment I recognized the song, and the lyrics ran through my head. "Now we're done. It sure was fun, but thanks to you, now we're through." The door slammed shut, the whistling was extinguished, and my screams filled the air. Well, it didn't quite scare me that much as I was expecting it to. Let's move on to another story. This one is called Whispers from the Woods. It's already creeping me out already because I hate the woods. And yeah, so I remember when I first moved into this accursed house. I was 10 years old and loved all the things a 10-year-old boy loves, you know. Climbing trees, catching bugs, playing cowboys and Indians, those sorts of things. We had moved from the hustle and bustle of the Big Smoke to the small Cheshire village of Helsby. Helsby, with its prominent red stone hill, sits nestled at the top of the Mersey estuary. The hill sports a thick covering of gnarled trees, misshapen by the strong onshore winds that rush from their home on the Irish Sea, funneled by estuary, coming to rest at the foot of the hill. The village is also surrounded by a vast expanse of marsh that holds a depressing, sullen atmosphere, even on a clear sunny day. The various wetland birds adding a constant chorus, shrill cries. Our new country home was and still is an old Jacobean house with a sprawling garden to the rear, scaling and looming red hill behind. A vulnerable playground for a 10-year-old boy. The first thing I noticed upon moving to Helsby was how quiet it was at night. You could hear a pin drop, and this dead silence was quite unsettling, having been used to the constant ebb and flow of noise emanating from the Liverpool streets. I would sit up in bed for hours, listening for any sort of noise, fancying I could hear people talking or the pitter-patter of mice scurrying around in the dark. Sometimes, though, I thought I could hear other things more sinister, things I knew were there, just beyond my sight, hidden in the inky shadows. The first time I began aware of the low, barely audible whisper was maybe 3 or 4 weeks after we had moved. I was not frightened or worried by this, as I merely assumed it was my parents talking or exchanging some heated words, as they often did. There was a fractious relationship, with my mother wanting more for herself and indeed us, and my poor father being unable to provide. The whispers started during a tempestuous storm that raged outside my window, the wind and rain battering the rust-colored front of our house. I had just finished reading about and was dozing off when I thought I heard my name being called in a low, muffled tone. "Daniel, Daniel," it repeated perhaps 4 or 5 times. I quickly flicked on the bedside light, but couldn't for the life of me figure out where my name was being called from. I sat there in the dark, the covers pulled up to my chin. I must have sat for an hour or more, straining to hear. In the end, I put it down to my imagination and eventually dozed off into a sound, dreamless sleep. The next morning, downstairs over breakfast, I asked, "Mother, did you call me last night?" She said that she hadn't, and turned to my father, asking the same. He had not either. He told me that old houses make strange noises, and with the sounds of last night's vicious storm, that I shouldn't worry, that I would soon get used to them. He jokingly teased, saying that my overactive imagination was playing tricks on me. Oh, how I wished they were true. That day, I ventured outside to inspect the storm damage. Murky gray clouds still hung to the hill's summit, giving it the impression it was much more immense than it was. Looking up into the tree line, I was amazed by the volume of old trees that had fallen in the night, lying motionless on the hillside like fallen soldiers. Many of these trees appeared to have rotted from the inside out. probably due to some insidious fungus slowly draining the old tree's life. That evening, after dinner, I sat at a desk in the front room doodling in a great scrapbook quietly nestled in a moldy, cobweb-filled alcove, when again heard that menacing whispering of my name. Daniel, Daniel. I turned looking around the room, but nothing was there. It couldn't be the storm now, as there wasn't one, so, as my father said, I put it down to my overactive imagination and continued to doodle when I again heard Daniel, this time followed by the quick succession of pattering feet. I jumped up, knocking my chair backwards to the ground. I slowly approached the old mahogany sideboard where I had last heard the pattering of small, unseen feet coming to a stop only to find nothing there. Confused and frightened by this, I crouched down and looked under the sideboard, finding only dust-filled cobwebs. However, as I stood up, my fingers moved over a series of small scratches at shin height on the sideboard legs, as if some miniature human-like figure had been hiding, watching me with tiny clawed hands gripped in around the leg of the sideboard. This growing feeling of being watched grew over the following weeks as the frequency of whispering along with accumulation of other bizarre sounds come to a climax late one night as I was playing close to the great oak just beyond our garden boundary. The sun had almost set and long twisted shadows were being cast across the lawn, although I was far too absorbed in collecting the abundant acorns scattered around the ancient tree to notice such things. That's when I spotted a pair of bright green eyes staring at me with malicious intent from beyond in a clearing in the bushes. In fright, I dropped my collection of acorns and shuffled back to the dirt, trying to put some distance between myself and this unknown creature. Perhaps 10 or 12 seconds had passed, but in my mind it seemed like eternity as the creature held its ground and stared dead into my eyes. Then, with the flash of a wide, toothy grin, it darted off into the bushes, leaving me trembling all over. I knew then that this was my unseen stalker. Not much happened after the incident. In the garden that night and the winter passed relatively uneventful. The leaves shifted through their spectrum of colors. Christmas came and went, and the first signs of life had appeared once again on the looming heights of Helsby Hill, and I grew confident that the evil little creature with all that harm and hate in its eyes had gone for good. We were in the midst of an unseasonably warm spring, and much of my free time was spent exploring the highs and lows of the hill at the back of our house. I had become an avid adventurer, being that little bit older, which gave me the confidence to wander further and further than previously allowed. This, in hindsight, was my undoing, for one sunny weekend afternoon I was hurriedly making my way up the rat track I had worn into the garden lawn, bursting through the flimsy fence headfirst into the bushes and trees. I was scrambling and climbing steadily to the first vantage point on the hill when I felt a sharp, painful scratch on the back of my leg, followed by what sounded like laughter. When I had reached the huge rotted log which marked the vantage point, I stopped to examine the source of my pain, and to my horror found 5 tiny, evenly spaced tears in my trousers, which had also cut my skin and drawn blood. I sat there in shock for what seemed an age, panic-stricken and paralyzed with fear as the realization that whatever had been stalking me in my home was now actively following me, and what was worse, causing me harm. When I finally zoned back in, I felt a massive rush of adrenaline, and I hurriedly made my way home, only stopping to quickly listen to see if I was being followed. When I arrived home, I was shaken, and seeing my nervous state and the tatty condition of my trousers, my mother asked what had happened. I dismissed her by telling her the neighbor's dog had chased me, and in my effort to flee had torn my trousers on a bramble, for I did not dare tell her the truth. Besides, would my parents have even believed me? That evening, as I prepared for bed, I was on edge, fearing whatever had attacked me that afternoon would make its way into the house, into my room, and this time cause me considerably more harm. I spent over an hour checking all the usual places a child checks: under the bed, in the wardrobe, and the other numerous shadow-filled spaces around my room. Only when I had deemed my room creature-free did I venture to sleep. The night passed without incident of so I thought, but upon waking I found the bedsheets around me littered with the crisscrossing of tiny clawed feet and handprints, some of which had only been centimeters from my sleeping head. I let out a scream and ran from the room. Shrieking, I dragged my mother and father to my room to show them what had happened in the depths of night. Surely they had to believe me now. Entering the room and seeing for themselves the state of the bedsheets, they surmised that a wild animal had perhaps gotten in during the night. A wild animal here in the Cheshire countryside? The closest thing to a wild animal was Mrs. Anderson's Shih Tzu, further along the street. However, upon inspecting the footprints and claw mark, they became more confused than anxious and laughed it off as a clever prank I had played on them, telling me that I should apply those brains to my schoolwork. I went to school that day, terrified out of my mind, knowing that something was living in the woods behind my house, and that worse, it could enter my house unseen and climb onto my bed and do God knows what while I sleep. The school day passed painfully slow, but it did allow me to think how I would deal with whatever was going on. Finally, school had finished, and I arrived home with my mind made up to take on whatever had come uninvited into my room the previous night. I sat that night well past my usual 8 p.m. bedtime. My mother and father had gone to bed, and as far as I know, could tell, were sound asleep. At around midnight, as I wholeheartedly fought to stay awake, I heard the pitter-patter of those horrible little clawed feet, followed by the low whispers of, "Daniel, Daniel." My heart started to race, and I frantically scanned the room, looking for the source of the whispered voice. Then suddenly my eyes fell upon it, standing there in the corner of my room, having must have come through a small hatch I had never noticed in the bedroom floor, as it was covered by a small table. I guess it was used to access the piping under the house or something. It stood hunched, maybe a foot and a half tall, with long, thin arms, ending in short, stubby, claw-like fingers. I literally felt like there was something there, holy crap. It had huge, green, shining eyes that even in the low light of the room still shone unnaturally bright. Its torso was quite stumpy for the length of its arms and legs, as its legs were also ending in short, stubby feet with hideous clawed toes. Its skin, from what I could tell in the dim light of the room, was a mottled, gray-colored, stretched over a bony, misshapen skeleton. It stood there, watching me for an age, before it quickly started to walk toward me, its clawed feet tinkering on the ground as it walked. I sat there petrified, unable to move. The next thing I knew, it had shot across the room, was there on my bed, crawling toward me, its hideous clawing hands making tiny tears in the bedsheets as its feet and legs left dirty smudges on the whitened linen, all the while whispering in that horrible low guttural tone, "Daniel, Daniel." I shut my eyes and hoped it would all go away. I opened my eyes and the creature was gone, bright spring sunshine threading its luminous tendrils through my bedroom curtains. Was it all a dream? I asked myself. Assuming that I must have fallen asleep and dreamt the entire thing, I jumped out of bed and hurried downstairs in the search of breakfast. When I arrived in the kitchen, I could see my mother standing by the sink with her face in her hands. My father was standing there with a hand on her back, making small affectionate circles as if to comfort her. This shocked me. I approached, unsure of what had happened. Then my mother spoke in a faint, whispering cry. How could this have happened? What has happened to our boy? I was confused. What boy? Did they mean me? I asked. Father, what is wrong? What has happened? He turned to look at me, saying nothing, his hazy eyes filled with tears. He gave my mother a short hug and walked toward me, all the while tears streaming his face. I was growing more and more alarmed. I asked again, Father, Mother, what has happened? What is going on? Still nothing. He reached the door and walked past me up the stairs. I followed him, unsure of what I would find as he headed toward my bedroom door. Turning the handle, he entered, the door giving its usual squeak, and there, through the opening, I could see a form on my bed covered in my duet. I screamed and rushed into the room. What was this? Who was this? I turned to my father, standing there in the doorway. He seemed unsure whether to enter. He ignored me still. I stood motionless as he approached the bed and pulled back the covers, and there in that bed lay me. I know now that whatever lives in the woods expanse of that red stone hill ruthlessly murdered me that night, and that it sits there in the undergrowth, waiting for another boy or girl to come, live here in my house. But I suppose it won't be that bad, for at least I'll have someone to play with. Okay, so I was thinking about reading one last story, and I'm going to try to find one that's not too long. Okay, this one says it's a half-an-hour read, so I'm not reading this one. But yeah, I literally thought I seen something at the corner of my eye, but I don't know, it was probably my hair moving, but it scared the crap out of me. The last story is called Mommy's Home. A father is laying in bed after just waking up. He grabs the baby monitor and walks to his desk in his office at home. He has his baby on the baby monitor and hears his wife singing to her. He cracks a smile as he hears his wife, when suddenly the front door opens up and his wife comes in with groceries.
That was not scary at all.
Phone is dying, so I don't think I can do another one. That's it for today's video, because the phone is at 1%.
Can we go charge it? Do you have the same charger? Do you want me to bring
No,
the charger
it's your
from
phone.
Mommy's room?
It's your phone. Wait, don't forget to subscribe, like the video,
Give 10 thumbs up.
and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye! I know most people are probably gonna say Negan, but no. I'm gonna say the governor, because he was the most hated character for me. That whole storyline, I forgot what season it was. Was it season 3 or 4?